How could a giant, armed with a seemingly endless supply of men and machines, be brought to a standstill by a nation a fraction of its size in the unforgiving grip of a polar winter? This was the question that echoed across the world as the Soviet Union, a colossal military power, launched its invasion of neighboring Finland in the final frigid days of 1939. The conflict, which would become known as the Winter War, unfolded against the broader, chaotic backdrop of the Second World War, a brutal sideshow that began just 3 months after that global conflagration ignited. It was a war born of geopolitical maneuvering and strategic paranoia, a conflict that would last a mere 3.5 months, but would leave an indelible mark on the history of both nations, culminating in a peace as harsh and cold as the battlefields on which it was fought. The path to war was paved by secret agreements and escalating demands. In the late summer of 1939, the world was stunned by the signing of the German-Soviet Pact, a non-aggression treaty between two ideological nemeses. Buried within its protocols was a sinister redrawing of influence in Eastern Europe, and Finland was designated as falling squarely within the Soviet sphere. With this assurance from Germany, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin turned his attention to a small northwestern neighbor. Citing grave security concerns, specifically the vulnerability of the city of Leningrad, which lay a mere 32 kilometers or 20 miles from the Finnish border, Stalin initiated a series of demands. He insisted that Finland's border be pushed back by 16 miles along the strategically vital Karelian Isthmus. This, he argued, was necessary to create a protective buffer zone, shielding the major Soviet city from a potential attack by the Germans, who might use Finland as a staging ground. The Soviet Union's proposals were extensive, requiring Finland to cede substantial border territories. In exchange, they offered parcels of land elsewhere, but the core demand for a security perimeter around Leningrad was non-negotiable. Finland, however, refused. To acquiesce would be to surrender their sovereignty and compromise their defensive lines. The standoff intensified until the Soviet Union manufactured the pretext it needed. A faked border incident was staged, providing the Kremlin with the supposed justification to act. On the 30th of November 1939, Soviet forces poured across the border, commencing a full-scale invasion. The international community was swift to condemn the unprovoked attack. The League of Nations, the world's foremost body for international cooperation, deemed the assault illegal and took the dramatic step of expelling the Soviet Union from its organization, a powerful but ultimately symbolic gesture that could not halt the advance of a single tank. On paper, the conflict was a grotesque mismatch. The Soviet Union possessed overwhelming military strength, boasting vast superiority in both tanks and aircraft. Yet the initial stages of the war defied all expectations. The Red Army, though immense, proved to be a clumsy and ill-prepared behemoth. Its soldiers were poorly led, its command structure was rigid, and its forces were shockingly ill-equipped for the brutal realities of a Finnish winter. They were completely unable to cope with the unique challenges of the terrain and the punishing weather, where temperatures plummeted to as low as -43 degrees Celsius, a staggering -45 degrees Fahrenheit. In this frozen hellscape, engines seized, lubricants froze solid, and soldiers in inadequate uniforms suffered horrific frostbite. In stark contrast, the Finnish army, though small and desperately under-resourced, was a force of remarkable resilience. Its soldiers were well-led, highly motivated, and possessed an intimate knowledge of their homeland's dense forests and frozen lakes. They turned the landscape into their greatest weapon, employing clever guerrilla tactics, moving like ghosts on skis through the snow-laden wilderness to strike at the lumbering, road-bound Soviet columns. For more than 2 long months, Finland repelled the Soviet attacks, inflicting devastating losses on the invaders. The fighting became concentrated in several key areas, each becoming a symbol of Finnish tenacity. Battles raged at Taipale along the Karelian Isthmus, at Kollaa in Ladoga, Karelia, and with legendary ferocity along the Raate Road in Kainuu, where Finnish troops annihilated entire Soviet divisions, leaving behind a haunting tableau of frozen corpses and wrecked machinery. The humiliation of these initial defeats forced a reckoning within the Soviet military. Stung by their failures and the staggering casualties, the Red Army Command reorganized its forces and fundamentally changed its approach. Learning from their costly mistakes, they adopted different, more effective tactics designed to systematically crush the Finnish defenses. In February of 1940, the Soviets renewed their offensive with terrifying force. The assault was preceded by one of the largest and most concentrated artillery bombardments seen since the First World War, a relentless storm of high explosives that tore the Finnish lines apart. Following this thunderous barrage, overwhelming numbers of infantry and tanks surged forward, finally overrunning the exhausted Finnish defenders on the Karelian Isthmus. The sheer weight of the Soviet onslaught was too much to bear. With its brave soldiers nearing the brink of total exhaustion and their stockpiles of ammunition dwindling to critical levels, Finland had no choice but to seek peace. Hostilities officially ceased in March of 1940 with the signing of the Moscow Peace Treaty. The terms, dictated from a position of Soviet strength, were severe. The treaty, formally concluded on the 12th of March, forced Finland to make painful territorial concessions. The country surrendered a large area of southeastern Finland, a region that included the culturally and economically significant city of Viipuri, which the Soviets promptly renamed Viborg. Furthermore, Finland was compelled to lease the strategic peninsula of Hanko to the Soviet Union for a period of 30 years, granting the Red Navy a key outpost on the Baltic Sea. In total, the treaty stripped Finland of what amounted to 9% of its territory, a figure sometimes calculated as high as 11% of its landmass. Yet, in the final accounting, the outcome was paradoxical. While Finland had suffered a military defeat and lost a significant portion of its country, it had achieved its most fundamental war aim. It had preserved its independence. The Soviet Union had failed to conquer and absorb the nation into its fold. For the Soviets, the victory was a Pyrrhic one, achieved at a staggering and disproportionate cost. During just 3.5 months of fighting, their forces suffered over 300,000 casualties. This was a horrifying figure when compared to the approximately 65,000 casualties sustained by the Finns. The Winter War had exposed deep-seated weaknesses within the Red Army, a lesson that was not lost on observers in Berlin, and it had demonstrated to the world the incredible power of a small nation's will to resist. Finland had been bloodied and bowed, but it remained free. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts or next video ideas.